Committee on optimum sample sizes for northeastern states. He was president of the Indian Econometric Society. Besides contributing over 100 articles in various Indian and international journals and edited volumes, he has published several books, and he has been a consultant to several eminent international agencies like the ADB, United Nations, IDRC, etc. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. I now invite Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director of Impact and Policy Research Institute, to moderate the session and formally invite Professor Sharma for his remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simi. So I think we shall start with the chair's opening remarks without wasting any time. Welcome, Professor Sharma.
Thank you. To begin with, let me thank Director IMPRI for inviting me to chair this important session. And this is to my mind, this is a very important panel discussion, and the issue is very hot about the GST compensation. There is a lot of confusion on the story of indirect tax reforms goes back to the early 50s. Professor Kaldor was invited to give a report about tax reform, proper appropriate tax system in the context of India. He proposed for the first time that there should be consumption tax. Subsequent to that, there was Taxation Commission 1954, and after the number of given the importance of indirect taxes in the revenue system of India, a lot of committees, commissions, and task forces to reform the tax system. But there was a problem in the indirect taxes because of the predominant role of indirect taxes. It created a lot of problems because there will be multiple indirect taxes, which also became hindrance to unifying the Indian economy. And there are multiple rates of taxes by different states. It was, as a result, revenue was not buoyant, and there's huge leakage of tax administration. Subsequently, in 2003, I'll not take much time. Briefly speaking, in 2003, a task force headed by Professor Kelkar, Dr. Kelkar, proposed the GST, and subsequent to that, in budget 2006-07, the GST was in fact proposed. But then, since it involves both the central and states and constitutional amendments, there's a long-drawn consultation with the states. The government of India then constituted an empowered committee headed by, to begin with, finance minister of the West Bengal government. And it is a decade-long consultation process with the states. At the end of it, in 2000, at the dawn, in the midnight of July 1, 2017, the center announced the GST, and hailed it as a dawn of one nation, one tax. And indeed, GST is a very important reform. About 126 countries in the world introduced this tax to their benefit. France was the first country to introduce GST in 1954. And the advantage of this tax is that it subsumes many commodity and service, indirect commodity and service taxes. And that it becomes a single tax, and it becomes also for one tax, one nation. But ideal in the GST should have only one tax, so that one tax rate, so that there could be minimum leakage. But the GST as introduced in India has got a number of taxes, 6 taxes from 0 to 28%. And so it had given this kind of number of tax rates, it creates a lot of problem. It does not become transparent, and this leaves the opportunity for the taxpayers to manipulate the tax by interpreting that this one commodity falls in 28% bracket or 18% bracket, so they prefer the one which is the lowest. So this the great advantage of GST is to have a single tax rate, but in the Indian context there could be a little more, but certainly not 6. Certainly there should not be 6 tax rates, which creates a lot of problem, and we are losing a lot of advantages of GST. 13th Finance Commission made a computable general made an exercise in the computable general equilibrium framework and simulated the model and found that GST could in fact be growth inducing, and it can truly augment growth. It can augment the export of the country. There are many more, and there in fact were many advantages of GST, but in that exercise only one single tax was assumed. But now that in the one which is in operation has got a number of tax rates, that in that process some of the advantages which GST inherent in GST have been lost. And now that in the process of consultation with the states, there was an agreement, and in fact on the Parliament Act and also the constitutional amendment to compensate the states to the extent of if there is a shortfall over the 14% growth of the tax. And now that the whole issue has become very hot because of the fact that the mechanism which was provided to compensate does not yield the required amount. That the maximum that could be mobilized in the recent past is around less than 90,000 crores, but what is required is about 2.35 lakh crore. And as a result, there is the compensation to the states is pending since April 2020. And that has really raised a question. States are not agreeable to accept the two alternative proposals that or options that central government has given, and that will, I think, will be discussed by the panelists. I don't want to go into details, but the issue is that indeed the central government finance is also under stress. But states are much more, because they have given up 8 taxes. Each state constitutionally assigned 8 taxes and all cesses and surcharges in the process of accepting the GST in lieu of as a single tax. And they have got very little maneuverability. That is again, in the COVID situation, it is the states which are in the forefront in fighting the COVID-19. And therefore, they're hugely under stress. But then in the process of the consultation, whether the agreement was that there was some cess will be levied on so-called seen goods to compensate the states. But there's cases the states argue that when there was surplus, that was not shared surplus from the revenue yields from the cesses. But when there's a shortfall, the government is not willing to compensate. And that is one of the issues. And at the same time, there's another, on the other hand, it is argued that center has never agreed to compensate from the Consolidated Fund of India. Yeah, if there's a shortfall, they have not agreed to compensate from the Consolidated Fund of India. And that is how they'll be compensated is something which the council, GST council should sort it out. So this is the kind of confusion. I think in this context, this panel discussion has been arranged. So I request, I think we have got very distinguished panelists with different perspectives. Because Gowda combined in him both academic and political perspective. I think I invite Professor Gowda to make his presentation. I request him, I understand that he has to leave, so that he is given the first, first to start.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. Without wasting any time, Dr. Mehta, can you please, introduce?
Thank you very much, Professor Sharma, for your opening remarks. This is my absolute delight and privilege and honor to invite Professor and introduce to you Professor Rajiv Gowda, who is an Indian politician and academician. He is a former member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha and a national spokesperson for the Indian National Congress. He serves as the chairman of the Congress Research Department. Professor Gowda was a professor of economics and social sciences and the chairperson of the Center for Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Management at Bangalore. He has served as the director of the Central Board of the Reserve Bank of India. Professor Gowda holds a PhD in Public Policy and Management from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, USA. He was also a postdoctoral fellow in Law and Economics from University of California, Berkeley. Professor Gowda was a visiting scholar at the Center for Jurisprudence and Social Policy at University of California. And at University of Oklahoma,
may I jump in? I mean, I really have little time left, so
yes,
I think you introduced me enough. You introduced me.
Sure,
Thank you so much. Since I have to leave in 10 minutes, it's really, I don't think anyone really cares about all the other details. But let me just get down to the hard-hitting facts here. When GST, thank you so much. When GST was established, it was a result of a very historic compromise, a compromise that came about because the center, in the form of the finance minister at that time, Shri Arun Jaitley, promised a very magnanimous 14% annual compensation increase, compensation for GST losses, assuming a 14% increase in GST revenues every year. And that was actually a fairly unrealistic assumption, but it was the incentive that got the states which had opposed the Congress and UPA's efforts to come together for GST earlier. It got them to come to the table and work out this historic compromise, which has actually ushered in a new chapter in terms of India's fiscal federalism. After that, after the midnight drama and everything else, you actually had multiple instances where two things happened. One, when there was actually a surplus in terms of the collection of these resources, because the cesses were levied on certain demerit goods and cars and things like that, and the amount collected was more than what had to be paid to states. At that time, the center happily absorbed the excess, the surplus, in its own, as part of its own resources. The second part of it is that there were many times when states actually brought this up in GST Council meetings and said, what will happen if you don't raise enough money to pay us as you have promised? And every time the central government pointed out that they will ensure that resources will be taken care of and that it would not be an issue for, to be concerned about. So that's the historic backdrop. And then, if in the last month or so, you start to see one of the finance secretaries, the revenue secretary, I think, and then the attorney general and others, sort of releasing statements in the media that the center is going to backtrack on this particular assurance. And the very fact of the matter is that this is nothing short, from the state's point of view, regardless of party lines, this is nothing short of betrayal, because states gave up their rights of taxation and agreed to this compromise on the basis of this assurance from the central government, which is not just an assurance, it's there in a constitutional amendment that facilitated the introduction of the GST regime, and it's spelled out in detail in the GST Compensation Act. So basically, this is both illegal, unconstitutional, call it whatever you will. But think about it from a point of view of where we are today. The states are at the forefront of the battle against COVID. Their finances are already stressed. This is the time when they needed more resources. And actually, over the course of the last 6 months, the center has given a lot of responsibilities of fighting the battle to the states, but has not actually allotted resources in a similar manner, and in fact dictated lockdowns, etc., which possibly have been more stringent than states would have preferred. Now, at the same time, looking forward, where is the money going to come from to cope with all these challenges, the healthcare and other issues, economic revival issues? Well, states will possibly have to cut their capital expenditures, which is not a good thing, or they have to borrow more. Now, when it comes to borrowing more, this is where you need to think through what is the relative capability of the center versus the states. Now, the center has not just the ability to be the sovereign and therefore to borrow at a cheaper rate. States will only have sort of an implicit sovereign guarantee behind their borrowings, but the center has a direct sovereign guarantee that they will somehow find a way to pay back their loans. So therefore, the rate at which center can borrow is less compared to states. It's probably more efficient to do it in one tranche and then lend forward to the states, or to allot it on the basis of the Finance Commission's formulae, things like that. There are possibilities like that. But the center, as you're seeing, has other ways of actually raising resources. It can borrow from multilateral institutions. It can, sell portions of public sector undertakings. It can, of course, monetize this debt, and and that's also entirely possible. All these are more efficient, more practical, and more effective ways of raising the resources that are crucially necessary at this point in time. But instead, you have the finance minister going to the GST Council and saying that, coming up with this very creative argument that there are two parts to this slowdown in the economy and the consequent shortfall in GST collections. One part of the slowdown is due to the GST implementation related issues, and that loss she computes at about 97,000 crores. And then the remaining, which is about nearly 1,35,000 crores or so, she says it has nothing to do with with the government's assurances to the states. It's an act of God. Now, there's nothing in the arrangements that have been put in place to to differentiate between acts of omission and commission on the part of the central government and acts of or otherwise of God. So basically, this is a new argument that's been cooked up. It's the center has similar party governments in the majority of the states, and therefore is able to get away with it. But basically, this move is a blow to the whole fiscal arrangement that was brought in and touted as a revolutionary move. Now, we all want one common market within the country. As Professor Sarma was pointing out, this is something that's taken a long time in coming, and really now what you're going to see is a move on the part of states to start coming up with a little cess here, a little tax there, etc., which negates the very effort of the original GST itself. So in this sort of a circumstance, all we can say is that this is a very unfortunate turn of events. This is, as my party leaders have said, as some other, as the finance minister of communist-ruled Kerala has said, as the Trinamool-led Bengal finance minister has pointed out, all of these basically are saying that the states have been betrayed. This was not the compact that was put in place, and and basically, if you actually look at the larger ambit of center-state relations, if you look at how the center has been collecting, cesses and surcharges which are not shareable with states over the last few years, at a time when petroleum prices have been lower in terms of global crude oil prices, you actually see terrible behavior, frankly, and the price is going to be paid by states for what has been monumental mismanagement by the central government of India's economy in the years preceding COVID, and as you can see from this whole exercise, in a continuing manner going forward. So I will have to stop here, but thank you so much for accommodating my unnecessarily crowded schedule, and thank you for raising this issue. It's a very, very topical issue. I do hope better sense prevails. I do hope this doesn't get lost in the courts, and I do hope that we can make this extraordinary effort of fiscal federalism transformation into something that's much more long lasting. Thank you, Dr. Arjun, and my fellow panelists and audience, and kindly excuse me.
Thank you, Professor Gowda. I'll just ask you a small question from you.
Sure.
In this deliberation, as you are also the opposition party and also representing states. So, what are the options in your view? All the parties and state governments are going to exhaust given this scenario, and the parliament is going to start next week. So what are the options states and opposition parties would take on this matter, especially
I can see about 3 options right away. One is, of course, bringing it up in parliament, but that won't do very much because I'm not even sure how parliament is going to function in this revised context. And of course, the government has a majority in both houses now. The second part is that some of the governments may take it to court. I have not discussed this in detail, but I expect that is an option that is perfectly viable. And then, of course, as I mentioned to you, states may start, introducing certain, sort of quote-unquote emergency cesses and surcharges and coming up with other ways of raising resources. And of course, a majority of the states are going to go ahead with one of the 2 options that the central government has provided them of actually borrowing money from the market and having this paid out over a course of time. I think that may end up becoming the practical solution for the majority of states. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. So we'll have to see that whether what the BJP ruled states are doing, whether they are following the finance ministry's stand. Thank you so much, sir, for coming here. And Professor Sharma, if you have to add anything or ask Professor Gowda anything, or sir, we will email to you and send to you all the questions which are raised here. Thank you again. Shall we go to our? Yes, thank you so much, sir. So now I think without wasting any time, we should go to our next panelist, Professor R. Kavita Rao, Acting Director at NIPFP. Simi, can we have a brief introduction, please?
Yes, Kavita Rao has a great advantage. She has been associated with the formulation of the tax at different stages. She knows the inner stories. She has contributed quite a lot in the formulation of the tax. So I think she can share her experiences about the design and implementation of the tax. Would like to introduce Professor Kavita Rao?
Yes, Dr. Mehta.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, Professor Kavita Rao is a professor at NIPFP, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in New Delhi. Ma'am has received her PhD in economics from the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, and her master's degree in economics from Delhi School of Economics. Her research interests, as Professor Sharma rightly pointed out, include design and implementation of the goods and services tax in India, the methodology for assessing the comprehensive impact of various tax exemptions on the economy, the sectoral interlinkages and their implications in planning a growth strategy. So thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. I invite you to make your opening remarks. Thank you very much for joining us.
Ma'am, you are...
Ma'am, if you could...
Yes, unmute, ma'am, kindly. Ma'am, your mic is on mute. You have to unmute.
Yes. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much to be a part of the panel. I don't have a PPT of any kind to share with you, but I will try and talk through what I see as inbuilt concerns in the GST design, which have sort of come to the fore with the current COVID crisis. Needless to say, COVID has been a challenge for all governments, not just in terms of the revenues, but in terms of how it has impacted the economy. And if the economy is not doing well, you expect revenues to correspondingly not perform as well. So what is the challenge beyond the fact that there is a tussle on how we will finance the compensation package that has been promised to the states? There are, I think, 2 or 3 key features of the GST regime which need to be kept in mind when we are talking about the impact of COVID on GST. The first among these, as has already been flagged, is the fact that the compensation package was sort of designed in a more than generous manner in order to encourage the states to accept the introduction of GST. Implicit in that whole story was the idea that center underwrites, in a very broad sense, the potential losses. In any given scenario, it is possible that you can find resources for compensation, but when the cess implemented or introduced in order to find the revenues for compensation of losses, was also built on the same base as the GST revenues. When the GST revenues shrank, the compensation cess would also shrink. So in addition to the fact that the amounts of revenue required for compensation are substantially higher, the revenues collected from the cess are correspondingly lower. So if you look at broad numbers, you were collecting more than between 8,000 and 9,000 crores a month last year, and you're collecting barely 7,000 odd crores this year. So the numbers have gone down. Correspondingly, the demand for, or the need for compensation has gone up. And within the GST regime, finding revenues to compensate is now becoming a difficult challenge. It was initially presumed that if you want more revenues to compensate, you can increase the cess, the rate of cess, and hence derive the additional revenues required. But given that the economy is not doing well, that doesn't really appear as an option. The second and third issues that I think are critical to how this crisis is playing itself out is the first is the idea that GST was introduced on the basis of a consensus across all states and the union government. The consensus has meant that we adopted the lowest common denominator. We have put in place, therefore, a GST regime which has a large number of rates. It has had to undergo a significant change in the rate structure multiple times since the 3 years of its introduction. And that effectively means that there is no group, there is no pressure to push rates up when it is required, but there is enough space and enough articulation to bring rates down. The voting parameters, the vote shares for the center and the states were also constructed such that neither the states nor the union can unilaterally undertake a measure to substantially change the GST regime. But that also means that there is no agency within the GST Council which can initiate a major change in how the GST regime is structured. So that is one thing we need to keep in mind. The second issue, which has appeared to be the big selling point, the attraction of GST, is the one nation, one tax business, which effectively meant that we wanted uniformity in just about everything across the entire country. Now, it is important to remember that absolute uniformity is not essential to get a common market. Whereas we have been encouraged to believe that common market emerges only when you have absolute uniformity. Think of what would happen when the 5 years of compensation period for GST comes to an end and the revenues under GST are still not adequate enough for the states. The center and the states, the GST Council can say 5 years was promised and therefore we are not answerable for any subsequent shortfalls. But the states will not have the option of choosing alternative ways within the commodity space, commodities and services space, to raise additional revenues. This sort of raises questions on how stable a GST regime can be if the primary source of own tax revenue for the states gets undermined going forward. So I was expecting a challenge of the sort to arrive after the 5-year period had elapsed and the states were no longer claiming compensation from the GST Council, but I think we have just arrived there a little earlier. So now, apart from everything else, like Professor Gowda was mentioning, there is a question about whether states should explore alternative ways of raising resources over and above what are coming through the GST regime. But behind all of this, it is important to remember that unfortunately with most taxes, there is some place where the buck stops. There is one agency, one organization which has the final say on how a particular tax plays itself out. Income tax stops with the Income Tax Department or with the Department of Revenue, Government of India. Earlier VAT regimes would stop with the finance minister of the states as well as with the tax department in the states, the commercial tax departments. Now with the GST regime, it seems that we really don't know where the buck stops. So who gets to hold or to articulate the last mile? That seems to have sort of got lost with each level of government trying to protect its own turf, its own issues. The GST Council, therefore, and the GST Council doesn't have teeth to raise resources. So it is dependent on the union government to facilitate this whole process. And the union government, having its own concerns, doesn't find it comfortable to bring forth these issues to the table. So it is. It all comes together to say that we really don't have anybody who puts GST first, everything else next. So that is where we stand now. So it is important to keep in mind is also the context in which we have had substantial number of reductions in rates within the GST regime. And we also have had a number of changes in how the compliance structure is formulated. So we haven't, unfortunately, had time for the GST system to settle into any one thing, either the structure or the compliance systems. We have had many changes, and now COVID has sort of come as one more hit on top of all of these effects. So where do we stand here? The good news seems to be that after the first 2 months when revenues were doing really badly, there is a pickup in the revenue performance under GST, but we are still short of where we were last year. So we are not looking at growth, we are looking at negative growth in GST collections across center and states put together. It is also true that if you look at return filing, then there are a smaller percentage of people, of firms and companies filing GST returns post-COVID than pre-COVID. So, and there have been a lot of relaxations given on filing for a variety of categories of taxpayers. So, where we stand today is we have nobody to claim the right and the responsibility to reset the GST regime. We are all hoping it will happen of its own. It is important to remember that center and states have passed their own laws, and so in principle they are capable of making changes to those laws. The information system might be a hurdle on how to go about with these changes, but push comes to shove, we might see dramatic changes happening going forward. I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Kavita.
Thank you, Kavita.
Pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Highlighting very pertinent points. In fact, the August figure stands at 86,000 crores, which was corresponding to last year 98,000 crores, which is a dip of around 15%. And as ma'am has rightly pointed out, that the last year figures, which was anticipated by GST Council, was per month it was coming out to be 1.15 lakh crores, which this year we have no clue, as most of the revenue is forgone. So now we would like to go to our next panelist, T.K. Arun sir. So maybe we can have brief introduction.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Mr. T.K. Arun is one of our most eminent commentators on very important issues. But I notice about Mr. I read his comments always, and what I notice is that he's extremely persuasive and articulate and persuasive. Most of the points he carries so forcefully and clearly that I am really impressed about his writings. Okay, but you'd like to introduce Mr. T.K. Arun?
Yes. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Sharma. Actually, I second each of your words you have spoken about Mr. Arun. Mr. T.K. Arun is an eminent journalist. He is the editor of Opinion of the Economic Times, India's leading business daily. He has been the paper's resident editor at Delhi, headed the Economic Bureau, and looked after the editorial page in several in the past. He has been with the paper since 1994, except for a brief 2.5-year hiatus during 1999 to 2001, when he edited an online portal called Narad Online. He has worked as a technical advisor to the Kerala State Planning Board before he began his career in journalism and journalism at the Observer of Business and Politics in New Delhi. Mr. It is a sheer delight and pleasure and honor to invite you and to have you at this program. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sharma, for those kind words. And thanks for giving this opportunity to speak. Now, the central issue is compensation. The term compensation itself implies three things. There is injury for which compensation is due. There is an injured party who should receive the compensation. And there is somebody who is responsible for providing that compensation, right? Now, in the present case, the center has taken the stand that the state should compensate themselves. The injured party is the state. The states haven't received the revenue they were due. And they were supposed to get the compensation from the center, which gave that promise that you will stand compensated in case there's a shortfall. Well, in the most absurd situation you are saying, now this is not compensation, this is actually repentance. Should the states repent having joined the GST regime? This is a question that this betrayal or this promise solemn promise made by the union government to the states to get them on board to switching to GST suggests. See, let us look at the macroeconomics of this borrowing. What is the center afraid of when it refuses to borrow money and pay the states their dues? Ultimately, what counts from the point of view of macroeconomic stress is how much collectively the public sector borrows. The public sector borrowing requirement is what, in relation to available savings and in relation to private sector borrowing requirement, that determines the level of stress in the system, right? And there, it's a combined borrowing of the center and the states that matters, not how much the center borrows or not how much the state borrows, right? Now, if the center actually forces the states to borrow, then in the years to come, the debt service burden on the economy from the government will go up, because the states will be able to get loans only at a higher rate of interest as compared to what the center will be able to get, which means they'll have to borrow the amount and entail and take on a much larger interest paying burden, for which they'll have to borrow higher amounts in the years to come. So you are actually going to increase your debt to GDP ratio if you force the states to borrow instead of the center itself directly borrow. Now, I mean, this is fairly straightforward. I mean, this is not any rocket science. But the real issue is, how can you reform the GST so that this kind of shortfall doesn't happen? You're left out large swathes of the economy from the ambit of GST. Why are petroleum products, power, tobacco, alcohol, some very major revenue earners kept out of the GST network? And real estate. Now, if you bring all these things into the GST network, your tax audit trail will be complete. There will be no breaks. If everything is complete, it's easier for you to follow up on these audit trails and catch hold of the those producers who are evading their taxes. GST is an indirect tax, but if you follow the audit trail created by GST, you will lead on to a treasure trove of direct tax. The direct tax base will widen dramatically if you follow these trails. Now, let's start from very large producers like those who produce petrochemicals. You know that newspapers have reported this, that trucks come from Surat to Delhi, Chandni Chowk, carrying garments. They have an e-way bill saying that they are bringing these garments in. And they will, when they'll go back, they'll carry a slip saying that there are rejections from Chandni Chowk. So they will effectively pay no tax because they'll be carrying e-way bills which say they are carrying rejects. But when they go back, they'll be carrying some other goods from Delhi to Surat, and they'll again come back claiming to be the replacement for the earlier shipment which was rejected, a fresh lot of gold, and they completely evade paying any tax. Now, how are they able to pay this, evade this tax? Because they haven't paid tax on the fabric or the yarn from which this fabric was produced in the backward chain of this production. Why can't the authorities follow up from where the bulk sale of polyester fiber takes place? There are not too many companies in this country which produce polyester fiber. This polyester fiber is spun into yarn by a few mills. This yarn is converted into fabric by the power looms of Surat. You ask Reliance or the other producer of polyester fiber to give details of all the people who are they sold their polyester fiber to. Go to those people and ask them to produce bills to show whom they sold their polyester fiber yarn to. Go follow up on the trail and go to all the people who bought those yarn and convert it into fabric. Then go down further. Ask the fabric sellers to identify all the people to whom they sold their fabric to make it to garments. You can follow this audit trail if you seriously wanted to, and you can get all the taxes you want. We want to become a $5 trillion economy with a combined central and state tax collection of 16.5 to 17% of GDP. Where is this possible? The OECD average is some 34% of GDP. The average expenditure for the OECD as government expenditure as a proportion of GDP is something around 38% of GDP. Margaret Thatcher brought down Britain's expenditure from 44% of GDP to 40% of GDP, and it is kept up back subsequently. So there is no way you can have functional, efficient government which is capable of providing the governance, the infrastructure, the logistics, the decision-making capability, pollution control capability, with a meager tax collection of 16.5 to 17% of GDP. Unless we raise this, we are not going to succeed as an economy. And how can we raise this tax capacity and tax receipts? Only by following up on the audit trails released by GST. One beauty of GST is that it actually plugs many loopholes. If a company pays a particular amount of tax, in absolute amount at a particular rate, then you immediately know what is the value added by that company, because GST is ultimately value added tax. If a company pays 18 crore of GST on a turnover of 100 crore, and it pays at 18%. Sorry, it pays 18 crore of GST at a rate of 18%. Then the value that company has added is 100 crore. That value can be broken up into gross profits plus wages and salaries. There is no escape. Then you have to show where are your gross profits, and you have to show where are the employees for these wages and salaries. You can neither hide the number of employees you have, nor can you hide your profits. This is the beauty of GST. That just needs for you to logically follow upon the audit trails generated by this tax. If we fail to do that, and if we fail to complete the GST network by including everything under the ambit of the tax, we will perpetually face this problem. And all our dreams of becoming a globally competitive economy, taking on China and fighting a war simultaneously with Pakistan, all will become a mirage. So it is absolutely necessary for our economy, for our nation to succeed, to be able to create jobs for the millions of people who are added to the workforce every year, that we reform GST and collect taxes honestly and move forward. So in this, what is required is cooperation between the center and the states. And it is this framework of cooperation that is being undermined by the current stance of the central government, that it will not be able to pay compensation. Now, it is true that the constitutional amendment which allowed the states to levy service tax and allowed the center to levy tax on final retail sale mentioned that compensation should be paid, and that Parliament will pass a law to enable this compensation. And the law that Parliament passed identified a GST compensation cess. But nowhere does the law say that only from the proceeds of the cess will this compensation be paid. This is very crucial. In fact, at one point, the government actually drew on the cess on coal, which was intended as a green cess, to pay GST compensation. So the center accepted in principle that you can draw on sources of revenue apart from the GST compensation cess in order to pay compensation. The center has done something very funny. It has replaced a large slice of the excise duty used to levy on petroleum products, diesel and petrol, with a cess. And that cess is not shareable with the state government. So they have deprived the states of a legitimate share of a very large chunk of revenue, petroleum being one of the most lucrative sources of tax revenue in this country. And through a sleight of hand, appropriate the tax to itself. Now, this is a grave injustice which somehow doesn't seem to have received the kind of attention that it should have. If you bring this under the GST compensation purview, you can easily compensate the states from this source. If you could rename your green cess on coal as a GST compensation cess, what prevents you from renaming the cess that you have levied on petroleum products, replacing excise duty and calling it a GST compensation cess? So this notion that you cannot find resources is absolutely ridiculous. From the point of view of public finance and from the point of view of reducing your debt to GDP ratio in the years ahead, the center should be doing the borrowing, not the state. From the point of view of the fact that Today, state governments combined spend around 60% of the total expenditure of the general government system in this country. And increased government expenditure is essential in order to stimulate the economy and get out of this current rut in which we find ourselves. It makes all eminent sense for the center to borrow the money, empower the states fiscally to spend, and combat COVID and the COVID-induced slowdown and emerge from this current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, children, for your brilliant presentation, as usual.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
No.
Thank you very much for, in a very aptly described by sir that the term sir is saying for this is repentance for states as the situation is emerging, and also highlighting the audit trail and what the positive things of this GSTN can be. We have almost more than double the numbers of those who are filing GST, despite having only 10 to 12 lakh companies, and we have around 7 million, 70 lakh registered MSMEs. Despite that, we have a lot number of GST filers, and we can do a lot with the GST and data sources. I totally agree with you, sir, that this is something where our country or our whole IT infrastructure is failing, that we are unable to make use of our government or administrative data, MIS data. In fact, government only says that it's not reliable. So that is across all different policies and schemes, something which come up. Thank you. Many points are raised. I think during our Q&A and answering to a panel, we can come back. Now I would quickly go to invite Dr. Suranjali Tandon to briefly give her remarks as discussant and raise any questions or reflect upon anything if necessary. Dr. Suranjali Tandon is a PhD and an expert on public finance, and also assistant professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, NIPFP, New Delhi. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Arjun. I think it's challenging to add to the points that the experts have already made, but I'll reflect a little bit on the GDP numbers and the GST collection and what that means for states in the coming year. So it was well known that the crisis was going to affect the tax collections. It's unprecedented, without doubt, and no buoyancy calculations or projections apply to this particular year. So everything that the government confronts today is out of the dark. Having said that, the recent GDP numbers show us that there's been a 24% contraction overall. And to that extent, we would have expected that the indirect tax collections would be as severely affected, and we've seen that it's been more than that. And interestingly, the recent numbers have been looked at in terms of GST collection or in terms of e-way bills as a reflection on where the economy is headed. And we are deliberating whether there's a V-shaped recovery or not. And I'd say that that number takes away a lot of facts that I think are important even for the GST discussion, which is to say that there are sectors, there are states that are differently impacted. So for example, even for the GDP numbers, you see that real estate or construction were in fact the worst affected amongst all the others, and then it would be manufacturing, and agriculture in fact showed a 3.5% growth, which means that the burden of the GST is going to be carried by certain sectors. And this growth that we are seeing could in fact be an interplay of stock and a consequent rise in inflation. So if you look at the corporate tax numbers and the income tax numbers, there's been a sort of revival in those numbers where income taxes perform slightly better, which means that there is some disposable income available and there is a supply chain disruption. So what are you expecting? That there will be inflation, which means that your GST collections which will actually reflect an increase in inflation in the economy. So that brings me to the point that you have certain sectors which will be bearing the brunt, which could also be that there are certain states which will be performing better. This also again relates to the fact that if you look at the IGST numbers, they were severely affected, and the e-way bill numbers are not back to the pre-COVID level, which means that there has been a lack of movement across states as it was pre-COVID level, which means that there will be certain states which will be adversely affected in comparison to the others. And that's true even if you look at the kind of lockdown that has been imposed. So there are some states such as UP and West Bengal that continue to sort of go on and off the lockdown on certain days. So their economies are differently impacted, and therefore their requirement to be compensated will be different. And that sort of brings me to the point of what do we do with the compensation mess. Well, of course, 14%, as all the panelists have pointed out, was a little ambitious. We are assuming that there would have been some compliance gains and there would be some possibility to compensate the states for moving on to this new regime. But having said that, now that we're in the situation and the center itself is constrained for resources, how do they raise money? And I feel that unless the states can borrow at the same interest rate, it will be unequalizing, even in terms of compensation. So I believe if there is an arrangement where the center could back the states for their borrowing, it would be a superior way to deal with this. And one other point, which I think was also a question to the panelists, is that do you think that the arrangement or the creation of a fiscal council could help in dealing with the situation? Because essentially what it means at the moment is that the constraints imposed by the FRBM are no longer relevant, and we need to ease these. And how do states then adapt to this situation? Could a fiscal council have made matters much easier? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tandon. Rightly pointed out, in fact, US, Europe, now no one is caring about what the numbers would be just to fight this pandemic. In fact, for US, they have given the package more than $4 trillion. Similarly for Europe and others. And looking at comparatively, we do not have numbers to match those. But however, as T.K. Arun sir also raised, and we all are raising, that there has been differences in this interest rate. So for most of the schemes, as we see also for housing, there is something called interest subvention subsidy. So is it the way ahead now? Is the differential in the rate of interest, will that something center would give as front for that differential, if that is that can be a mid solution, because center is very adamant that they are not going to change their position. And also what RBI has in its hand moving forward. So with these words, I would now like our chair to reflect upon the deliberation, and then we can go to the next round to our panelist, Professor Sharma. Over to you.
Just some questions, I suppose.
No.
To the panelist.
Yes, sir, you can reflect upon, also raise the question or make remarks. Okay. Then I am collating the questions, and then we can go to.
No, first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for the brilliant presentation. They have brought out sharply the issue involved. But I personally also feel that GST is extremely important as a landmark tax reform in the context of India, because there are a large number of indirect taxes which became very counterproductive. In that context, the GST is extremely important. But equally important is the design of the tax, that the advantage or merit of this tax should not be lost in the design, in a complex design of the tax. As we know that GST councils met many times and made multiple changes in tax rates and all that. And in my view, that GST was introduced very hurriedly, without giving much thought to the design and also the IT infrastructure, which is critically important for tax administration, was not in place. In that context, as a result, that is a problem. It is not that COVID alone has created this problem. Even prior to COVID, prior to the COVID, the shortfall of the resources from that were mobilized from the CSS for compensation. I think it is extremely important for why this compensation is important to the states. First, compensation accounts for 42% of the state's own tax revenue. And again, they have given up 8 taxes. They don't have much of tax handles anymore. And also, they have given up all these taxes, 8 taxes were subsumed in GST, and also the number of state cesses. Given this, the state's ability to mobilize resources are limited. But now the center, there at the same time as Party panelists have brought out, that center is also under stress, but states are under greater stress. First, they don't have much tax handles or access to resources. But center, their finances are under stress. They have access to many resources. They, as Professor Gouda has pointed out, they have got access to monetary resources. They can monetize the deficit. They have access to the international fund, agencies fund. Totally, the central government has got huge unutilized assets. They can monetize them. There are many resources. The center has got much more maneuverability. Therefore, since it is very important for the states that center should take the responsibility to compensate at the difficult time. The states are in the forefront of fighting COVID. They need resources. And again, this is a constitutionally and statutory commitment to compensate the states. And this will not go back on that. It is a great achievement to introduce this landmark reform. And now already Maharashtra Chief Minister has raised the issue whether we should go back to the previous situation. And they should not. I think this kind of situation should be averted. GST Council is a very democratic body. It's a very committee. Council has provided a forum for consultation, and GST Council should give their considered views how to resolve this issue. But somehow the issue has to be resolved. And finally, that the Prime Minister keeps on saying that we are one nation. So there's a one nation, one tax. And then similarly, when Prime Minister announced the agricultural tax reforms, he talked about one nation, one market, integrated market. And then in another case, they say one nation, one currency. So when you are talking about one nation, you should not do something for this temporary COVID-19 challenges are there. It will be there for a couple of more years. It is not going to go away in a year. But the Kodak Center has the capability to bear this loss. But they should not revert back to this. If they are going to go, they have proceeded towards cooperative, one nation, one tax, and similarly their unified economy, then now they should not go back and they should fully compensate the states by borrowing, because I know states in aggregate have got tax liability, debt liabilities less than centers. At the same time, tax when they borrow, it has got implications on the future revenue because of interest liability. But they still do not have that kind of buoyancy in the economy with 42%, depending on it depends on compensation for the extent of 42% of their own tax revenue. And therefore, they will not be able to bear the interest burden. It will be difficult on it. Squeezed here, even as it is, a large number of centrally sponsored schemes where every state government has to contribute one way or another some percentage of the implications. They are not associated they're not involved in designing the sponsored schemes, but even then they have to contribute, and that affects the finances of the state governments. Given all this, I am of the view, I think that the panelists are also of the view that the center should find resources to compensate the states. And since GST Council has assigned this task to find out, they should to see to it that there is no reversal of this important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for highlighting these pertinent points. And I'll just add some of the questions we are getting. Act of God by Balbir Arora, also of the Fiscal Council. Some other questions have also come. I would like to bring upon some of the issues which have also come. And Professor Sharma is also saying that now the GST and this COVID is not a short-term problem. It has become a medium-term problem. So what can be the way forward? Professor Rao has also added that she was foreseeing this after 2 years, but due to the pandemic, it has struck to us, and we have to see. There is also one other reform which was about to come was e-invoicing. In fact, some of the market players have also adopted that. So after e-way bill, that e-invoicing was something which the market was looking very much forward to because of the payment and delay payments and compensation those issues and credit system. Also the IT system per se and the whole GSTN network is not be it B2B or B2C export or other, or be it the state governments as customer for most of the things. The ease of doing business thing is really not helping from the indirect taxation or GST point of view. So I would also like our panelists to reflect upon those, and also the changes in rates, which is, Finance Minister also announced that for two-wheelers they will announce some, slashed rate of GST. Insurance sector is also asking for the same. The whole real estate industry is also asking for that, and yes, one other issue which I really wanted to for both the panelists to focus upon, that center also have this notion, or they also come up with, for states especially, that there is a very less capacity utilization by states in terms of the finances which they get from different sources. So that is also, I think, is also one of the crux of the matter of this contestation. So now I think we can go to our panelists for five minutes to also reflect upon the state of affairs and also suggesting the way forward for this issue. So I think we can start with Professor Rao. Ma'am, Mike, yes.
Yeah. So couple of quick points before I try to articulate what I think is the way forward. First thing to remember that I think is important to flag is related to the incorporation of goods and activities within GST and correspondingly the rates. Bringing additional activities like petroleum, etc. into GST, we need to keep in mind it doesn't add to revenue. Government wants to collect revenue one way or the other. It is already collecting revenue. You will just bring that into GST. So it doesn't really add. Sometimes it reduces because you start providing tax credit. So that is one item that we want to keep in mind. So although they are kept out, they're still giving us substantial revenue. That revenue has to be recovered when you bring them under GST. So please keep that in mind. Second point of interest is the rates. If you see, there are very few cases where we will find governments, any government, articulating the need to increase rates under GST. We are all arguing that we need to reduce the rates. So if we want GST to yield revenues at this moment, we are not talking about reduction in rates. We also have to be clear that if we are talking about the economy, then GST might be the easiest channel through which to give a stimulus to the economy. And that trade-off is what a government needs to take. But unfortunately, we have tied up the decision making in the GST Council such that a reduction in rate translates into a reduction in both CGST and SGST. It would make sense now to partition the rates into a CGST and an SGST component and reduce the CGST component, let the SGST component remain unchanged. Because it's a macro policy decision that a government is taking, and that need not necessarily pass on to the state governments as a lower tax rate. So you want to stimulate the economy like we did when the financial crisis took place. We should be reducing the rates, but that needs to be limited to the central component of the tax, not spread across all. So that is one dimension that we should be looking at. The second dimension in this whole story is we seem to be forgetting that there is an economy we need to deal with. We are dealing with center and its FRBM, states and their FRBM, and the capital markets, but we are not really worrying about the economy. So if we need to stimulate the economy, then we need to step back and ask ourselves whether spending now is critical. Maybe we are talking about a short-term loan. Maybe if the government raises too much debt in the short term, it can renegotiate the loan 2 years down the line when the economy recovers. Why this needs to be seen as a long-term loan which we are stuck with and paying interest for all times to come is another question. So if we can quickly turn the economy around in any which way, we have the option of raising enough resources subsequently in order to pay those loans or to renegotiate those loans. Third point is that to give credit to the government and to the proposal, they were proposing that the principal will be repaid out of the GST cess in the times to come, so the states don't have to repay that component. Even for the first GST, the recognized GST loss, the interest was also to be serviced out of the cess. It was only for the act of God borrowing that the interest liability was to lie with the state governments. So if that is a possibility, then it should be possible for the union government to use the same resources and borrow. So the center can borrow and the servicing can happen through the GST cess. So if that is also an option that should perhaps be thought about, partly because not just the center finds it easier to borrow and at lower rates of interest, the idea that every state needs to show a debt and this artificial partitioning helps the center borrow at lower rates might actually really be an artificial distinction, because we all like to believe that markets factor in everything, right? So if markets are factoring in everything, then the fact that this component of the loan will be serviced through GST cess should itself be reflected in the kinds of interests that get tagged onto that bond. So I think that is an option that perhaps should be taken into consideration. That having been said, I think we are still not going to be looking at a money spinner GST for the next couple of years because the economy is not doing well, and we are not in a position to get the GST Council to bear the liability of its decisions. Everybody is, for the states, it has been argued for a long time that the states are taking decisions or agreeing to decisions because they have a fallback of 14% compensation. So once this 14% period is over, we have to look at a restructuring of the GST regime which makes it revenue neutral, the term we have lost sight of in the last few years, revenue neutral for the states as well as for the center. So that is something that we need to go back to the drawing board for. While I would like to see a single rate GST play itself out at some time, I don't see it happening in the near future, not in the next 5 years at least. Because a single rate will peg the rate at above 15%, and perhaps we are not yet in a position to bear, to politically accept a large number of commodities to be taxed at 15%. So we should perhaps be looking at a 2-rate regime at least, but definitely not at a 5-rate regime. I'll stop with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. We have got two more questions from Facebook Live. I think Arun sir can also take it. One is that what benefits the consumers receive due to the implementation of GST? So more so from consumer point of view, no one has came for any commodity where the price has been slashed. Also, the cascading effect of the indirect tax issue is something also Professor Rao was touching upon. The rates issue also, the indirect taxes have a lot of cascading issue. Also, this one is in Hindi, the GST compensation कैसे settle हो जबकि government VAT का settle नहीं कर सकी अभी तक. So the VAT issue still, that remains. So that state of affairs. Arun sir, over to you.
Yeah. Now, we have, as I said, less than 16% of GDP as a combined tax collector center in the states. Of these, around 8% is indirect tax. Actually, possibly a little more, closer to 9% is indirect tax. Around 2% is customs duty. The rest is your earlier excise duty, current earlier sales tax, current GST. Now, this proportion of GDP that is constituted by indirect tax has remained unchanged before GST and after GST, which means the tax burden has neither gone up nor gone down. Whereas we should actually be collecting much more tax. Now, this is because we haven't been able to lead the audit trails generated by the GST process and discover greater tax bases that have been going untapped. And we must remedy this. Now, as far as the economy is concerned, whether you borrow small or borrow big now makes a big difference. Various projections done by economists on which they have commented in the public domain in the newspaper articles have shown that if you borrow big now and create a big fiscal boost today, the economic momentum this gives will ensure a faster growth rate and gradual lowering of the debt to GDP ratio in the coming years. If you have a timid level of borrowing now and give a weak additional moment to economic growth, then your economic growth will stay weak and your debt to GDP ratio will actually increase over the years. So it makes far more sense to borrow big now, give a big push to economic growth, achieve high momentum, and have a lower trajectory, a declining trajectory of the debt to GDP ratio in the years to come. Now, while it is true that if we bring petroleum products, power, real estate, etc. into GST, immediately we will not be adding to tax collections from these sectors. By completing the tax audit trail and completing the network, we will be able to discover segments of economic activity that have been evading tax or escaping tax and collect tax from them. The significance of bringing everything under GST is not only to make the whole system more efficient and avoid cascading of taxes, but also to complete the audit trails and discover every nook and cranny of the economy which have been hiding potential tax sources and collect tax from them. Therefore, it is important to complete the GST chain and there's no harm in doing it right now. Now, as far as I mean, the government is there is no reason why we won't be able to do this, because unlike most of the economies with a comparable per capita level of income, India's ability to handle data is much higher. We have not only advanced capability in institutions like the ISI and the NIPFP and other centers of economics and training. We have a computing capability. Ultimately, it is big data analytics which will lead to discovering of hidden tax bases. And we have the computing capability to do this. We can summon the power of artificial intelligence to analyze large range of data. And currently that's not being done. You know, simple fintech companies, they actually take the trouble to analyze people's Facebook profiles and assess whether they have been traveling abroad, whether they have been making fancy purchases, standing in front of the Taj Mahal one day, standing in front of Kanyakumari, Vivekananda Rock the next day, and posting selfies to assess this person's financial viability while taking a credit decision. Why can't the government tax agencies do similar analysis to identify people who have been filing very low amounts of income in their tax returns, but have been spending large amounts of money and indulging themselves in various kinds of activities? So we need to do more rigorous following upon audit trail generated by GST of economic analysis and large data analytics, and we'll be able to collect much more data. The incapacity of the government to crunch data is the major handicap in collecting taxes, and perhaps rather the unwillingness. Because what I suggested earlier, that you go to big producers of bulk commodities, steel, aluminum, petrochemicals, and from there trace the chain of people who buy from them and then pass it on down to smaller producers, you will be able to nail every single producer. Introduce reverse charge, make reverse charge mechanism universal. Reverse charge is when actually a small producer sells to a large buyer. The large buyer pays the tax directly. He doesn't, pay this tax to the seller and expect the seller to pay to the government and file paperwork. He says this tax is being paid for the purchase from this particular small seller, and he then pays the tax directly to the central government, and it takes credit for it as input tax credit simultaneously. So if you have the reverse charge mechanism, it will be able to bring a large number of small players who are currently out of the GST network to be identified as people who take part in the economic value chain, and also spare them the need to do much paperwork or file. Why can't we make this universal? Bring it in. Currently, around 1 crore 11 lakh people are registered under GST. Make it universal. We have 63 million production enterprises in this country. So I don't see why half of those cannot be brought under GST with reverse charge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would totally agree on the big data point, and also many of the industries. Again, I'll come to the example of real estate. Cement industries have been, behaving in oligopoly almost. In fact, almost steel and other industries as well. So Competition Commission of India has also time and again they put penalty and other things, but I'm sure that is easily trackable. Another thing which I really wanted to touch upon, that center is really pushing on this national infrastructure pipeline. 1.05 crore, 103 lakh crores, that's the package, around 7,000 projects. That is the way of investment or the expenditure central government is envisaging. Given the performance of our smart cities and others, I would invite any panel to suggest that what kind of expenditure or this transfer to state would lead also to a momentum again in our economy as well as our GST collection. Or any other question? If, in fact, Professor Sharma, if you want to add anything, if Professor Rao can add. So your mic is mute, Professor Sharma. Your mic, yes. It will be on the left bottom. Yes, mute, unmute. Ritika, can you do that? Unmute. Till then, Professor Rao, why don't let us have the last word from you? Yes.
No, last one is an uncomfortable position. But so let me just say that over years, in the last let's say 10 to 15 years, you have seen the infrastructure kind of spending becoming extremely capital intensive. The result of these is hopefully seen in the form of a better investment environment when the investment climate picks up. Whereas it doesn't do so much to stimulate the aggregate demand in the economy. So what you are perhaps looking for at this moment is to find ways to stimulate demand in a sharp manner so that the investor who potentially can invest finds the need to invest. At this moment, if I start building roads and bridges and pipelines, unless there is demand, there is no use for them. So that I think is an important thing. Finding ways to put money in the hands of people who will actually spend it, I think is critical to a quick turnaround of the economy. We all hate these demand pushes. People are very, very wary of creating entitlements. But I think the citizen is entitled to getting certain support from the government when the chips are down. So I think it is important for us to worry about the citizen and the economy and less about FRBM and foreign capital investment. So that shift in focus is required. And I think it is not the time to do capital investment in infrastructure of the roads and bridges variety.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Professor Sharma, if you can, yes, unmute. I saw that, yes, you were able to do it. No, sir, it's not unmute yet. You can try it again. Left bottom, sir. Yes, yes, working now. Please go ahead. Again muted, sir. Please click once all. Yes. Yes. Kindly click there, sir, one more time. We are not. Now it's working. You can try speaking. Yes.
It
Yes.
became,
Yes.
okay.
Sir, we have crossed our time, so I think, sir, you can conclude. Or, sir, if you have to ask anything from Arun, sir, or Professor Rao, you can. Yes.
But we have overshoot time, no?
Yes, yes. So we can just kindly.
It's okay. Then I would simply say that I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to listen to all these illustrious speakers, and I am greatly benefited. And also, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And thank all the participants for the brilliant presentations. Kavita, T.K. Arun, and Professor and of course, Dr. Arjun Kumar. And
thank you, Professor. Listening to all the panelists, especially Professor Rao and Arun sir, I'm really not thinking what will be the way ahead. I think we'll have to look into the newspaper every day. Thank you very much. And I think we can propose a vote of thanks, Dr. Mehta. Yes.
Very much respected panelists for joining us today. It has been such a learning experience. Professor Atul Sharma, thank you very much. Professor Rajiv Gowda, Mr. T.K. Arun, Professor Kavita Rao, and Dr. Suranjali. Thank you so much for joining us today, this evening, and for sharing your brilliant insights. And I'm sure everybody has had a great learning experience. Thank you very much. And Dr. Arjun Kumar, thank you very much for moderating the session, and Team INFI for coordinating the entire IT thing. Thank you very much, and wish you a very good evening and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, have a nice evening.
okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.